How come you can't see it?
I don't know.
That's really strange. You've got co-host.
Yeah,
I don't
I
know
go
what's
to
going
more
on.
and breakouts. Obviously, it must be like hidden, like behind something. But
Yeah, Akil's back. Marie's back. So we're all returning back. Welcome back, everybody.
Can I just say sorry to my group? I was halfway through something. I clearly was not watching the time well enough. And then we just got cut off and taken back.
Marie.
I was exactly the same, Marie. Exactly the same. So I'm very well not watching the clock. So I'm sorry to my group as well.
We're going to take a little bit of time to get some feedback before our keynote at 3 from Wes. So I'm going to give you all three groups, the opportunity to give some feedback. So hopefully, Marie and Phil, you can finish your sentences you've been cut off as a bare minimum. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to take some short feedback now from each of the groups. So we'll go in the order that we've presented here. We've got group 1, led by Marie. This is a group of new mentors, so those who are completely new to mentoring, perhaps have had some mentoring experience from their own, from being mentored. And your session was around thinking about what a mentor is and what qualities they need, reflecting on your own experiences, and giving you a brief introduction into IL6 and to instructional coaching, which is essential and key to us here at Inspiring Leaders. So Marie, would you like to give us a snippet of where you got to?
Yes. So first of all, Lisa, I'll just say that obviously instructional coaching is very, very important, but that is the bit that I was cut off halfway through. So we'll talk about that again when we do our induction meeting in September.
Absolutely.
We talked lots about the key qualities of a mentor. And we kind of picked out the one that we thought was most important, which was quite tricky from our list. But lots of people talked about being a positive role model in lots of different ways, both from a professional level, but also as a teacher and, you know, the way that you speak to students and pupils. Lots of people talked about being an enabler and helping the trainees to be able to achieve all of the things that they want to and putting that support in place for them to be able to do that. We also then talked about kind of our experiences of being mentored. So thinking back to when we were a trainee, an ECT, or maybe if we've done an NPQ and we've had a level of support through that. And key things that really came out from that were about being approachable and having the time. And we talked about the fact that teachers are pretty busy, and actually sometimes giving that impression that you have lots of time to talk to a trainee is really hard because you've got a to-do list of 20 things that you're thinking about, but just making sure that trainee feels that they can come and talk to you at any point if they've got anything that they are concerned about.
Thanks, Marie. That's a really, really reflective summary, I think, of what sounds like a really good session here. I like the word enabler being drawn out because I think linking in with that idea of capacity and time, mentors can't do everything. And it's around enabling you to facilitate the connection. So don't feel as a mentor that you need to have all the answers, nor that you need to do everything. It may be about providing the introduction for the trainee to go and speak to another colleague in your school setting. You act as that enabler, that guide to things. But of course, at the same time, you're that first point of contact and you're that role model to the trainees. And we do know they really do value the work that our mentors do. So these are really key themes that I think will come through conversations regardless of where you are at with your mentor experience. Okay, let's move on to, I want to invite anyone else to add anything there. No, Marie did such a good job. You could all sit back. That's what it is. Over to Phil then. Sorry,
go on, Marie. A couple of people who contributed very well to the session. So thank you for that.
Keeps it going, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you to those. And now on to Phil. So Phil, in your session, you were thinking particularly around elements of inspiring leaders with people who already have some experience of being a mentor. And you were thinking around instructional coaching, around how we set targets using granular steps, and around introducing this group to IL6 and giving them time to reflect on IL6 characteristics for themselves. So what's your feedback, Phil?
Yeah, great group. Absolutely fantastic. I think we were talking, communication came out key throughout us, and we were talking about talking about reflecting upon our own practice, and everyone was saying about communication and giving the trainees freedom, giving the trainees a bit of time as well to and we're saying about how hard it is sometimes as a mentor to let go. When you've got a class yourself, when it's your data, when it's about having, and again, it was summed up perfectly by one of the group that said, now it's a case of they found it initially quite hard to let go, but now it's much better. They step back and they work together to co-construct targets and reflect on it together, and providing that opportunity for reflection has been great. Most of the group that I work with, obviously because they're new to IEL, they said that the first areas they need to be looking at are going to be the processes and how we do things as well, which is like a Blue Peter moment. Is some we created earlier, some videos we created earlier that they can use. We did talk about the when we're giving granular steps and trying to think about what's got the highest leverage with trainees, and talking about the key thing is when we're giving targets, we're giving the buy. We're giving them a target, but we're giving them the buy and giving them a strategy to try and achieve that, because it takes away the cognitive overload from the trainees, and it gives them something to think about. We also talked about the fact that the mentors, it's going to be great. The mentors are going to be observing them and assessing them, because they're working alongside them all the time, so they can provide that rapid intervention and that support needed if needs be. But yeah, there's lots more that I probably haven't written down, but the group were fantastic.
Thanks, Phil. That again sounds like a really rich conversation, thinking around those wider skills of communication and how important it is to give our trainees the opportunity to have a freedom to try things out, but also recognizing some of those more practical steps that we take with our target setting and with our approach to instructional coaching, which will really help to bring about the best changes and the best improvements quickest for the trainees. Anything anyone would like to add from that group? It's all gone quiet. It's obviously done a great summary for your group too.
Probably, obviously, Lisa, the fact that what they're going to add to our own, we've got a lot of experience, haven't we? And a lot of experienced people, but actually, thoughts from the outside, people who said that they've been a mentor for the PGC program for university, and they're going to add so much to everyone. So
and we'd really like to hear from you as the year progresses. You may find that there are things that you've experienced that you can bring into our conversation as well. We're always looking at new ideas in the same way that a teacher is in their classroom. Okay, let's move on to the last group. Last but not least, Chantel, your group. We're talking around reflections of experiences within the 5 areas of the mentor curriculum, so the 5 strands, and thinking about where a mentor felt they've got experience and thoughts around that, and then thinking around advice and top tips for anyone in this mentor role.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I was also very lucky. I had another great group who were absolutely wonderful, loads of valid contributions. So it was a pleasure to work with them today. So we started off the session by talking about, because they are our experienced mentors who have worked with us in Inspiring Leaders previously, about what's gone well this year and what we can do to keep improving our programme. And it was really nice to hear the feedback that people have welcomed the switch to Teams this year, and they felt that that's really enhanced our programme. And obviously we'll continue with Teams next year. So that's really, really important. We then moved on to look at the mentor standards, and we talked quite a bit about the fact that we're all incredibly busy, aren't we? But it's really important that our experienced mentors take that time to keep developing themselves as mentors. And so we collated a set of top tips, and there's some brilliant top tips on here, which I'm going to type up and I'll send across to you, Lisa, and then you can share them perhaps with our new mentors, so they can have those as tips when they're starting out as a mentor, because there's some brilliant ideas on here. So I'll get those across to you. And then I didn't want to do it in a pledge kind of way, but we kind of just made a little commitment to ourselves of what are we going to do this year to make sure that we continue to give give ourselves a little bit of time and we develop ourselves as a mentor moving forwards. So overall, it's a really lovely session. One just quick question is that I know we're keen to get started on LMS 365. So you might cover this later, but when will they get the logins and password? Will that be over the summer?
Yeah, so we're talking to the, obviously you can imagine it's a massive IT task. So I know Ben's met with the Discovery IT link person that we work with to try and work out how we're going to get, what is hundreds of people signed up. Some will have Discovery email addresses, which will help, some won't, so they need to be invited as guests. So we're not sure how big a task it is at the moment, so we're just checking with them. But you'll definitely have it over the summer. It'll be properly launched, 1st of September. For everyone to access, but I'm hoping there'll be some access before then, so people can have a little play with it over the summer.
Thanks, Dirk. Chantel, you've teased us there with your list of top tips. I wonder if you can share one of them. We are coming up towards the end of this session, but I'm curious to hear a little bit more.
One that I really like, because I'd had the same conversation with somebody previously, was don't try and turn your trainees into a mini you. And I'd had exact same conversation with somebody last week who was feeding back to a trainee, and she went to feed back because they didn't do it the way she would have done it, and she stopped herself and realised that actually they got to the same endpoint and it was exactly the same result, but it doesn't need to be done the same way. And she said she stopped and she learned something from her trainee. So I thought that was a really valid point.
And that's a great one to just pause this section with, but we'll look forward to hearing more and reading about this list from you in due course. So we will share that with you. Thank you, everybody. That sounds like that's been a really, really positive conversation in all three sessions. All hub leaders have just shared how that's been a really productive and lovely session. So I think it's a good sign for our trainees, isn't it, to know that they're going to be well supported by a group of mentors who are really looking to do their very best for these trainees in what we know is already busy time.
Thanks, Lisa. So obviously the final section that we're going to be having is the keynote from Wes Davis from Two Counties. Jane, do we know if he's on the? There's so many people on here. Is Wes with us at the moment? Has he joined?
No, he hasn't joined yet, I'm afraid, Dirk. Just waiting for him to join.
No worries. Has anyone got any questions? I saw a question someone asked earlier actually about the other MPQ programs. So obviously there's lots of those newer MPQs now, or you might have done a previous one. So we obviously the easier one to map was the LTD, and it's ones that across the whole of the East and West Midlands people have mapped already. But the other ones, certainly, when you're filling your diagnostic, if you've done the leading behaviour and culture or leading teaching, if you just reference that, and then we'll be mapping that in the future. So it will be worth hours. We just need to confirm how many. As I say, the leading teacher development's the easier one because it's more closely matches ITT. So we will be looking at mapping other MPQs as well, if that's useful for people. Any other questions while we just pause for Wes?
Any more questions? We've got a question from Scotty. Sorry if you checked this already. If we complete the MPQ LTD from September 24, can we count that towards our hours then? Yes, you can.
Yeah, because it will be within the year. It will be within that first year. So that's fine if you're completing it within the year.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, the awkward thing will be when things cross over next year with not knowing what is going to happen. There's nothing set other than we mentioned right at the start that it does mention 6-hour refresher. So we're not sure what it will look like moving forward, but certainly things that have started either. I think we can go April. We can go far back as April for current training, but yeah, any prior learning is fine up until the end of the next academic year. So what we'll do, I think I said this before, but we will recirculate the latest mentor guidance for the funding. So obviously it changed all the while. I think the last one came out in May. Sure, you can imagine there'll be other ones that come out as well moving forward, like little adjustments when some questions that we're all asking. then we will share that with your schools as well about how to claim for it. And we'll be claiming for instance, like ITAPs and stuff. So we'll be in the same boat as you. So we'll all be learning together how we claim for that. So one final question, then I think our guest is here. So the diagnostic, we'll share that again. So that went out on the reminder of the date. There's a diagnostic we'll be sharing. The first few questions are a bit like what we asked today, what Lisa's been asking about, where you sit in terms of your experience level. And there's an opportunity there for you to write what prior learning, and that can start a conversation with you about finding the overview for it and mapping it across. And then there's all the questions that link to our mentor curriculum that Lisa explained earlier, which would be really, really useful to see. And we'll have almost like a scoring system to find, to help you do a bit of gap analysis really, and pinpoint any CPD you want to do with that as well. Great. Well, thanks for that. Some great questions. I think we had the answers to most of them, which is really good as well. And we do have our guest has joined us now. So I'd really like to introduce Wes Davis from Two Counties, so CEO of Two Counties. I'm sure he'll introduce himself as well, but really, really fortunate to have Wes give up some time for us. I've seen the slides, I've had a little sneak preview in advance, looking really, really good. As I said at the start, we asked about change because we were thinking about the change. We were just thinking about ITT really, but since we've been speaking to Wes, change within education is going to mean a whole lot more with whatever happens next week. So a much broader remit than we originally thought, Wes. But Wes is going to do a broad sort of thing on change, and we hopefully it's adaptable to all the pathway levels and experience levels you're talking from. Be really useful for yourselves as teachers and leaders within schools. And yeah, as outside of IT, it's really going to step us hopefully towards the future, however it's going to look within education. So welcome, Wes. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much, Dirk. Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's session. I'll try and get done by 4 o'clock. I'm known for talking a lot, so Dirk, tell me to stop talking if I'm running over. I'm just going to share my screen now so I can get my, I think it's that one. Just make sure I share the right thing. Sorry, you can see too much there. Can you see my screen now?
We can see your desktop, Wes, yeah.
Right, dismiss all. So it wasn't, that should be. So hopefully you're going to see a PowerPoint. That'll come up.
Yeah, we can see it.
Right, lovely, thank you. Right, so welcome to the session. So I'm going to talk about change, as Dirk said, and the beauty about education is we can always rely on some change in education. So really delighted to talk about this and manage change management. So just a bit of 4 things I'll try and do this tonight's session. One is give a bit of background on me, who I am, and my current job. Look at perceptions of change, because we've all got things we think when we hear the word change. I know what I think. Look at a little bit of theories of change management, see how some of us might feel about change. And then I'm just going to talk to you a little bit how we manage change at the Two Counties Trust since I arrived. And any questions, queries, concerns, please pop into chat if you can, and I'll try and keep an eye on them. Dirk, if any questions come in that I don't notice, will you just shout out to me and I'll stop, if that's okay. So,
no problem.
Thank you. First of all, then, a little bit of me. I'm just an RE teacher, so I'm very much an RE teacher. My passion is teaching religious education because it's really exciting. If you know it as RS, that's because it's really special. So either way, it's a great subject to teach. So I started teaching back in the year 2000. My background was I spent a long time examining for RE at A-level, so very much into the A-level RE. And I was really lucky. Last few weeks I've been doing some revision at Willstop School with the A-level group. It's been the best part of my year, so it's been really great to be back in the classroom. I often spent a lot of time leading local subject networks for RE, so managing change at kind of subject level. And I won't go through the amount of curriculum that we've currently had in RE, kind of the different versions of different specs. I then spent some time being a middle leader, really exciting part of my career, being assistant head of year, getting into the pastoral system, which I absolutely loved. I then went on to be head of department and head of faculty. I then had very senior leadership roles in my previous trust, which was Dixon's. I led on teaching, behaviour, CPD, innovation. That was a very exciting title in 2010. It soon went there. It was kind of one of those kind of trendy titles that just went away when we realised we had no money to do any innovation. I led on appraisal and faculty reviews, and for a period of time I was a SENCO. I put that in brackets because I feel really uneasy about saying I was a SENCO because I didn't do it very well, but I did have the experience. My career pathway was started at One Trust Dixon's Academies, which was based in Leeds and Bradford. I started as an NQT in 2000 and then left in 2021, where I'd made my way up from the different kind of avenues through school leadership to executive principals level. I opened three schools, really important part of my life and something I'm really proud of. They went on to be rated outstanding, which is absolutely fantastic from an Ofsted point of view, but just generally the opportunity to leave a legacy behind and do something. And I think back to those buildings really, and parents taking a leap of faith when there was no building to be in place, sending their children to school, which was really, really lovely. But lots of change doing that. And then I've been the CEO of the Two Counties Trust since 2021. And that's been another big change for me. Coming down the M1, I still live up in Leeds, so I travel down most days. And that's been a big change, A, managing the pandemic, and B, trying to establish a different vision for the trust since 21. Some impact statements, just so as a trust, since being here, around 4,000 students moved from an RI school to a good school in 18 months. So really proud of what we're doing around raising ambitions for children and for staff and for families in the communities we're privileged to serve here at the Two Counties. But our ambitions much beyond that. And I do a lot of work at School Improvement Partner. I do that really to be really nosy, to go out and have a look at what other trusts are doing, so that actually we can learn and get better as an overall organisation. So in amongst all that, you can see that in my career has led me to manage change an awful lot, from department subject change to onto middle leader and pastoral change, looking at kind of setting up new schools. I managed to line manage a primary school and a secondary school colleague, so that was a big change for me, as well as open a sixth form college and then move trust. That was all kind of elements of change. So on to that then. So I want to talk a bit about perception of change. Now, when I see change, when I talk about change, I talk about change to staff. Often it's seen as a negative thing. So you might see change as read, oh my gosh, all this is changing. I think if we heard new specs were coming out for our subjects, we think change. If we think a new ECF framework is coming out, we think change and think negatively. But I suppose it's how we see change, and our perception of change is often molded by our experience of change. I'm really privileged to be in the world of work we're in education, because there's always change and we always can actually end up influencing other people's perception of change. So what we want to do is really think about how we're mindful of change happening. And depending how you think of it, you might think change is really great. So I may have made just an assumption there, a wrong assumption, and you might think change is really good. But I have to be honest, it's one of our core values at Two Counties Trust. I always think change, oh crikey, what's changing now? Have I got the bandwidth in my head to deal with even more change? So when we think about change, about how we approach it and think about, is it good or is it bad? And often, really, if you think about the change continuum, you've got one side seeing change as being really good or seeing change as being bad. I just want to kind of think to us, whether that's in our personal lives, in our professional lives, change can actually mean different things, and it's not necessarily good or bad. But often what makes the idea of what the change is good or bad, the perception or reality, is what the change is, how it's going to happen, the implementation process, when the change is happening, but more importantly, the why. I think if you read a lot of leadership books now, the focus on the why. I think everywhere I go, people talk about the why and sense of belonging, to key things in leadership at the moment. But I do think those four things enable us to think about change in different ways. So when we think about change, or whether we're leading change or managing change, think about what's happening, how it's happening, when it's happening, and why it's happening. And if we get the four answers to those questions right, our perception of change may change as well. Pardon the pun. And actually, when we look at change, change is constant. It's everywhere we go. It's all of the time. One thing is an inevitable part of life. Often it's met with resistance, whether we're trying to change something for ourselves or change outside of school life. I've just brought in there the concept of dukkha. I don't know if we've got any other RE teachers on the call or on the meeting this afternoon, but concept of dukkha is a Buddhist term, which I always think about. Buddhist teaching around dukkha is that everything's always changing. And actually what causes suffering in the world is we don't want things to change. So we've all probably changed in this meeting. We've all got a little bit older. We've probably got a little bit wiser. Maybe we've feeling a bit hay fever. The change in our nose. We want to go back to how things were. But what the Buddhism teaching is very much about actually thinking about trying to let that go and realizing change just happens all of the time. So my RE teaching helps me think about change as well. Not that I'm advocating Buddhism, it's just an interesting concept. And the psychology of change is really important, about how we approach change if we want a successful transformation. Most changes, because actually people believe that change is for the better. And I don't think anyone who instigates change often thinks it's for the worse, but trying to manage a situation. In our lives, we can either be a leader or manager of change. We can lead the change that's going to happen to us, or we can actually manage what we feel is being done to us. And some of the theories suggest these different stages of actually whether we begin to lead that change or we let it happen to us, and therefore we're just managing something that's external to us. So if you look down that list, there's different stages there. For example, pre-contemplation, where people are not even yet considering change. We don't even know what's going to happen. We don't even realise there's a time for change or something needs to improve. We get to where we contemplate and we think, actually, there is a time for change. We need to do something. We start preparing things and we start thinking about planning for change and preparing for the change and the action. That's when the change actually happens. But after that, things need to be maintained. We need to maintain it. So actually, how do we maintain the change? And I can see that in both kind of our working lives, but also outside of our working lives. How do we manage those things? I'm beginning to think I need to move house. I always battle with my weight, so all that kind of maintenance of change is really important. But actually, change is constant, and change is not a bad or good thing in itself, but actually it's just part of human life. But how we tackle that is often helpful, in whether it's transformational or not transformational. So I just wanted to have a look at kind of this diagram here for a little while before we start looking at how we manage change. People have made shed loads of money coming up with change management processes. So you can see different models. I've just literally Googled this the other night and just come up with these different models. You can read lots of different books and lots of different articles about how to manage change and what that might look like at organizational level. And obviously some of that flows through into kind of your individual life outside of work. But ultimately, I think what that tells us is that when we manage change, there has got to be a process, not necessarily there's a right or wrong way of doing it, but we do need to have some kind of process in our minds, which helps us feel in control, helps us to lead that change rather than manage change. So we're going to have a look at kind of what types of processes you could put in place. So again, not an advocate of a particular type of change model, but actually you need to align to one in order for that to be successful for you. And I'll just do a traditional one that I'm sure most of you have heard of before. If you haven't, it's kind of Kotter's 8-step change model. And what Kotter was very much about is a kind of a research that came up with the idea is that businesses need to be like trees. And if you know, trees kind of bend in the weather, some grow in the light, some get knocked over by the winds. If organizations and humans in effect don't change, we're at the risk of kind of withering away like a tree does. It's really important, according to Kotter, that we actually think about change in a step process. So he says actually successful change wasn't just about strategy or willpower, but understanding the human nature involved. We all could have the absolute willpower to change something for the better, absolute willpower to make something better. But actually, if we understand the human psychology behind it, willpower on its own is not enough. Organizations like trees, I said, we need to be like the best possible tree and flexing with the conditions around us, reading the environment around us, and bending as much as we need to. If we don't do that and we're slow to adapt to a changing environment, then an organization is at risk of withering away, that actually we lose a bit of impetus, we lose a bit of kind of momentum, and the organization itself does not develop. His view was that organisations that embrace change, and probably go back to those two colours I said at the start and see change as green rather than red, are likely to be ones that thrive because they see change as an opportunity to get better rather than actually losing something that change is a bad thing. So again, easier said than done, completely agree with this, easier said than done, but I always try and force myself every time there's a change in education or change in anything, actually what is the opportunity here? There's always an opportunity. Strategic management is about making informed, intentional shifts with kind of that focus the organisational goals and vision. And I think when we get change coming into education, which as we know, as Dirk said, might be all of a lot more soon in the next couple of weeks, depending on what happens. Although my hypothesis, I don't think there's going to be too much change too quickly, given where policy is that we try and make those change in line with visions and goals of ourselves individually and with the organisation we're working within, because that's really important. That's where we lead change. So actually, we can manage this change, but actually it needs to look like X, Y, and Z, and then we feel we're in charge of it, which is really important, not to be pulling away from our moral compass. So he has eight steps, as Kotter says. With all that in mind, there's 8 things we can do to lead change. So if you're wanting to lead change at home, or lead change in school, or lead change in your classroom, you could adapt these 8 steps really, really easily. One is establish a sense of urgency. Actually, things need to change. That kind of idea of a burning platform, that actually is something that would be really beneficial from a kind of an uplift, a change of direction, a refresh. And then he talks about forming a guiding coalition. And this is about getting the people around you who will help you enact your change eventually. So actually people who are on the same like mind, kind of people who work with you, and that guiding coalition will also act as your critical friends, because change, it obviously needs a pre-mortem approach about what might go wrong. Kotter also says we need to create a vision for change, that actually we need to define the end point, because saying to someone, actually, this is going to be really great, this needs to change, Most people agree actually things need to change. It's what it changes to, which is really powerful and really compelling. So trying to make a real compelling case what the change might be. And if you can't convince someone of the change is probably not quite right yet, or not quite on plan as the way you want it to be. Communicate the vision, and you've got to communicate with absolute clarity to people about what the change might be. That might be about changing how you're going to do assessments. That might be changing how you're going to your feedback policy. It might be changing how you want children to line up before the start of lesson, or that might be change outside of work. But absolutely being committed to that vision of what that excellence looks like for you, or the goal you're trying to achieve. And that's what I've always found really difficult. I've always thought, oh yeah, this could be even better, but really nailed myself down to what actually will make it the biggest difference. Can be difficult. Remove obstacles. Believe it or not, we all have obstacles in our way when we want to change. There's always something there, and trying to think about in advance what those obstacles might be, and doing the pre-mortem approach. What will be a barrier to this? What will it be? An operational issue? Will it be a strategic issue? Will it be a financial budgetary issue? Which I'm sure we've all got in our minds at the moment. We certainly have at the 2 counties, how much things will cost given the funding where we have. Actually, what are those obstacles, and how can we mitigate or manage those obstacles? Then when we get into change, about creating really short-term wins, so actually we begin to get some positivity around the change that we've instigated. So if that's changing your behaviour policy, changing how you're doing lesson observations or lesson visits, or you're on tours, or whatever you're looking at kind of teaching learning in your school, is try and create some short-term wins so that people actually build trust in what you're doing, and it seems to have a positive impact really quickly. So that's kind of your high-vis things. Then build on that change. I was using the analogy of a snowball, get some really firm change that's really compact and concrete. So you can say, well, look at what we're doing. This is fantastic. Look at the attitudes in lessons. Look at how our marking's reduced. Look at how we're lining children up. Look at how we're giving feedback that's helping people move on through action steps, etc. And build upon that change, and success breeds success. But as a leader of change, it's really important. We've gone in with that green mindset that change is going to be good. It's an opportunity. We've got that guiding coalition, people who are going to support us. We've told everyone what's going to be great. And then we start to communicate what those little snippets of greatness are, kind of the green shoots or the bright spots. And then anchor these new approaches in the culture of the organisation that you're working within, or in the framework you're in. That's really important. When we talk about change management, and one thing I've learned really carefully over time in the roles that I've been in, is actually when something new comes in, it needs a home, it needs an anchor, it needs to go back into somewhere. So if you have launched a new homework policy and you've been at the front of that homework policy, who in the end is going to take it over to actually make sure it becomes a sustained change, and actually that change is well maintained, as Cotter mentioned earlier on in his introductory to the 8 steps. So I think that's really important in our minds. We've got this kind of process in order to manage change, what we're going through. And I'm sure all of you have had lots of change this year, and probably thinking of change next year. And then thinking about kind of what's the leader's role to make sure that we are leading change in our lives, in our schools, in our organisations, rather than just managing change, which is giving and living the vision. So you have got to be absolutely the person that's got most fidelity to the new change that you've introduced, because you are probably going to be the most consistent person in that change. Build trust to make sure that people trust in what you're doing, allow people to make mistakes, be vulnerable, build that psychological safety where people can ask questions, so we haven't got an echo chamber and things are developing. Empowering people in your teams is really important, because you may have a vision for excellence, a vision for change, but actually you can't enact it all by yourself. Celebrate and recognising, which is really important. All of us human people, human nature being really important to celebrate. We use the term appreciate at the 2 counties. How do we appreciate everyone for what they're doing and the contribution they're making to the overall goal of working with our 11,000 children? And then inspiring persistence. And we know that actually greatness is being consistently persistent about the things that are important to us. So but inspiring that persistence, keeping it on the radar, keep praising, keep the operating model alive and whatever we're working on. So Cotter gives us a really great step process, but also defines for us what a leader's role might need to be in order for that change to be successful. So whilst we're thinking about change that's happened in our organisations or happened nationally, it's really important to anchor back in. And when those times are hard and you're thinking, gosh, this seems all a bit too much and lots of change, just go back in and say, what stages are we at? And that anchoring back to a framework really does help in me manage change in ourselves. And then just what I wanted to look at is just unpack an example of how we've managed change, and we continue to manage change at the 2 Counties Trust. And for those people who haven't heard of 2 Counties Trust, we're a medium-sized trust in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. We've got 9 secondary schools, so not many schools, but 11,000 children. And because we've got mainly all secondary schools, it does mean our number of children is fairly significant, although our number of sites is only 9. And what I've developed over a period of time is, as a leader, is that actually change management is so crucial, and actually getting that right really helps benefit our children, our staff, and our families and communities that we're really privileged to serve. So we've adapted what's called the TTC Empowered to Lead model. So I'm going to be absolutely honest, this is not from a textbook, this is just from 2 counties, and this is what I've worked on for the past 3 years since being at the Trust. But the first thing before you can actually have any kind of change management is having that kind of guiding mission, values that unites the whole organisation together. And for us at the 2 counties, we're really clear on why we get out of bed every single morning, and that's to provide our students the opportunities and experiences to enhance their life choices, making a positive contribution to the world we share. And we've got to make sure every change is absolutely mapped into that mission. We call it mission mapping, to be really explicit and intentional about change management that we're doing that helps us with all of those things. Just 2 things on there that's really important to us at the Trust is, one is about life choices, not life chances. So we're deliberate in using our terminology. We don't believe that a child's life should be a chance. So we talk about choice rather than chance. So being really intentional about that. And then making a positive contribution to the world we share, because we want children to leave our organisation with great results, having great time at schools, but actually wanting to give something back. And really important. And the 2 kind of images to the right-hand side of the slide is really important about how we think about change. We are trying really, really hard to make sure that we have got a level playing field, and that we've also got supporting our most vulnerable children, and that we want to make sure that our schools are designed by our most vulnerable children, so that actually our weakest link is as strong as our strongest link. Anne Robinson, pun intended, but actually that's about making sure that our schools are designed to support the most vulnerable children. So any change management we do is very much anchored back to those 2 things. Is it generally going to enhance life choices? And if it isn't, then we shouldn't bother doing it. And secondly, is it a change management that's going to help our most vulnerable children, which we refer to as priority students, which are SEND and disadvantaged children? They're the 2 groups that we've currently got gaps in attainment with at the 2 Counties Trust, which we're absolutely determined to eradicate those gaps. And then in order to guide that, to have your core values, I'm sure all your organisations have got core values, but for me, it's really important that values are laminated, because we do like a bit of branding, but also loved and lived in every action that we take. And for us, it's really important that our values are ambition, teamwork and honesty. So we want to strive for excellence, because with that, we're serving our staff and our students the best we possibly can. As a teamwork of I've got 120 science teachers or something along those lines. We need to work together, not repeating the workload 120 times across each teacher, but working together for the benefit of all. And that's really important, always with kindness and humility. And we're always really honest about our successes and our areas for growth, because that's about being honest and about having a really growth mindset. So we're really clear about, before we do any change management, is it what we're trying to achieve in our mission? Does it help vulnerable children? And is it enhancing life choices? Secondly, then, is it operating in this kind of values-based driven framework that we've got? Because if it's not values driven, then it's not in line with our mission. And that's when you have real kind of tension between the change that you're wanting to enact and the change that you expected to enact. If the change doesn't fit with that, that's where sometimes we feel internally a little bit kind of aggrieved. We've also got our 4 strategic anchors, which links into this in terms of where we're actually making change to 2 counties. So we've got 4 things, really. These are 4 priorities, but taking a Lencioni model. If you've not read The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni, I would suggest that as a leadership book. Really, really clear about what the work Patrick Lencioni says about how you create healthy organisations. And he talks about strategic anchors. I think it's just a posh term for your priorities. And what we're trying to do here at 2 counties is build a compelling learning culture, where actually learning inside the classroom is more attractive than any distraction outside it. Build a high-value curriculum which is based upon knowledge and skills. Put people first through really high impactful professional development, and move that on to have a culture of coaching, and then make sure we're empowering people to lead. And that's the bit that I want to talk about, change management. But actually you can't manage change if you don't know what you're anchoring the change to. So what I'm trying to say here is that have a clear mission, have a clear values, but also have a clear priority and parameters about where the change is living on there. And these are 2 diagrams which I think are helpful in the world of education when we're looking at change. And our Empowered to Lead model is very much about managing change for our leaders in schools. We are really, really clear, and I'm clear about an obsession with the front line, that schools are incredibly busy and not complicated, but complex organisations with, 1,000, some of our schools got 1,000, 2,000, one school's got 2,700 children in there. So ultimately, they are going to be very complicated and complex organisations. But the point of a trust, really, I believe, is those 3 things which in the Empowered to Lead triangle. To manage change, we've got to make sure we are creating time savers, and that's toolkits to help our leaders manage change. We know that actually any change is only successful if it's carefully implemented. So we do need to give professional learning to help with the implementation process of any change. And thirdly, leaders need to feel empowered to make informed decisions about their organisation, their staff, their children on the site that they're leading. Now, how we get there is through this this step model, which we call Empowered to Lead. So it's a 6-step model to change management, which we've developed. I've taken kind of theories from Patrick Lencioni, from Kotter, there's another book by Scott Keller, Beyond Performance 2.0, which is all about change management. And we've tried to develop something which is working for us, could be better. And I'll talk about where it's working well and what could be better. So we always start with research first of all, and we need to be an outward-looking organisation. That really helps us not to look inside 2 counties, because we're not one of the highest performing trusts in the country, but we've got ambitions to be that because we want to serve our children the best we possibly can. So we look at kind of where are those organisations, both nationally and internationally. So the things we do there is look at literature reviews, journals, blogs, all those types of things, look at trends in data. We spend a long time externally visiting and doing internal visits. So, I often take my teams out to some of the best schools in the country, and then we ask for expert input. So, for example, we're currently looking at homework and our homework, that thorny issue, how homework could be better across our trust. So we've had lots of people tell us their views on homework before we make our own view. Now, we are a domain specialist approach to change management. So, for example, on the homework review we're currently doing in the trust, we invite all the curriculum leaders in there. A few years ago, when we looked at the behaviour policy, it was all the behaviour leaders across the trust who looked at that. When we did our SEND matrix of need review, it was all our SENCOs, because they've got the best knowledge. They're our domain specialists, so we always defer to the brilliance of others. But we always start by research in order to open our mind and understand that change might then give us an opportunity to be even better tomorrow than we are today. And it's important we do all of that research, both from to be evidence informed, but not necessarily evidence led, and getting that absolutely correct. So once we've done the research, we then have dialogue, and this is where it gets very exciting. We kind of talk to each other, sometimes heated debates. We do a SWOT analysis and say actually an artifact about, just prompt real dialogue about change is actually look at what we're doing well, what's our opportunities, what are our weaknesses, and what are our threats, and being really open and honest about that and being vulnerable with each other and saying this is where we are. We then look at action planning, say actually what could the future look like, bearing in mind all of that research, rich research we've done in order to plan for the future. We may amend some project plans, say actually what we've just done, what we thought last year was not good enough and we need to be even better. It might be actually we're on track. What we try and do through the process, though, is avoid artificial harmony. It's a term that Lencioni uses, actually. If we want change to be successful, we've got to avoid just agreeing. We get the echo chambers, everyone's like, yes, where's your right? Let's just agree with that, and avoid that. And what Lencioni talks about when he talks about the kind of healthy debate and healthy change is that you avoid personal attacks in meetings and you avoid artificial harmony. So echo chambers, everyone agreeing with where's, or personal attacks, everyone just saying they don't agree because actually they just want to get home and say we're fine where we are. And what you want is that sweet spot in the middle, which he calls the ideal conflict point. The ideal point where there's some healthy challenge, we can have a very honest debate and talk about the way forward. So it's really important before any decision is made, there's real time and space made for this kind of change dialogue to make sure everyone has aired off their chest what we need to talk about. So when we did the behaviour policy, for example, we took 5 days on this stage because there was lots to debate about kind of what's the right way forward for our schools and for our children at the time we're in. So protecting time is really important. Then we try and create clarity, and again, a term taken from Patrick Lencioni is about how do you create clarity? Well, clarity is really about what we call decision grids. And decision grids are examples of what we do in order to come up with a decision. And to have a really great decision grid is, you might say, for example, homework. We had one last week, said homework. Option A is we don't set any homework. Option B, we set 2 hours a week. Option C, we set 3 hours a week. Option D, we let the teacher choose. And therefore we say, we take every possible option and really debate them out and say, what's the pros and cons of each one of those consequences of those decisions we might make. And what's really important for that is, as you engage in that debate, you've really got to put your beyond the hockey stick. A McKinsey paper says you have to stop sandbagging, which this is the next step of mine. When someone says let's do something, I automatically think why it can go wrong, because I really don't want change. So it's almost putting that to one side and saying, actually, blue sky thinking. Don't say actually the office staff haven't got time to do this. Don't say we need to buy another Sparks mass login, because all you're doing is saying reasons why this can't work. What is the best decision if we had unlimited money and unlimited time for children in our schools and our staff. So really coming to those decision grids with an open mind. We then make a decision that actually, so I think, I don't know where the group got last week, we were still debating about how much homework should set, but just let's imagine actually, we say it's 2 hours homework. We've then got to think about a toolkit which will be helpful for leaders and actually what will empower people to make a decision. So giving people some tools that will help them make decisions about homework in their schools. We talk about having responsibilities and for the creation of the toolkit. So for in the next couple of weeks as a trust, we'll be putting some examples together of great homework, not so good homework, but that'll be co-constructed with everyone involved in the change. So people in schools will be helping construct that. And I'm sure, again, that could work on a department level, on a classroom teacher level, on a corridor level, in a phase level, if you are primary school, about actually co-constructing that together. And that powerfulness of we want every child to have the brains of every member of staff across the trust, not just the individual teacher that happens to teach them in that lesson on that timetable in that particular year. So as well as the kind of education being a postcode lottery, we also don't want it to be in a timetable lottery. We always try and provide stakeholders an update on decisions as we progress, because ultimately, if the head teacher says this direction of homework is not good or this direction of behaviour policy is not good, we need to know that early on so we can adjust our kind of path that we're going down and make sure everyone's as happy as possible. Sorry, these are just some 2 counters, acronyms, but TPLA, our Professional Learning Academy, and our Central Management Leadership Team, making sure that actually our professional learning directors really key upon what change is going to happen and what professional learning might need to be involved at that point. And our kind of non-negotiables, no sandbagging. So this was particularly for me. Stop saying that word workwear because it possibly could. Just put your mind aside to stop that sandbagging aspect. And the other opposite of that, what a research paper tells us, is not to peanut butter. Because this was my other temptation as a leader, is try and do everything a little bit well, and actually just need to do less things but much better. So that idea of peanut butter and spreading the peanut butter so thinly that actually you don't really taste the peanut butter because it's so thinly spread across the piece of toast or bread. If you don't like peanut butter, it could be Marmite or jam or something else, but the analogy is exactly the same. So when you get to that creating clarity, try to avoid sandbagging, try to avoid peanut buttering to make sure that we get the best possible outcome. So that's creating clarity. Now, if you think about any change management, we've done the research, we think this is really good. We've had a dialogue and decided what's right for us. And then you've created clarity about the decisions you've made and you've said, this is the right direction of travel forward. Now, as a leader of change rather than a manager of change, how do you then actually get that to be a lived reality? So we've actually described the desired reality of what that might be. Lived reality is much more complicated, much more challenging. So we've got to think really carefully about how you communicate that clarity to everyone who's involved. And that means thinking about kind of the impact on current systems and the impact on all the toolkits. So, for example, we've just decided to, when we changed our behaviour policy, we went to something called employability standards. What we didn't do well enough is think about how that impacted upon class charts and how that impacts upon reports to parents. We thought, yeah, this is great new behaviour policy, all linked to employability standards, all linked to kind of purpose, not power, to make sure that we were in line with our 100% kindness, 100% consistency approach. But actually, we didn't think hard enough about what that would look like for an individual classroom teacher and what that change might mean when parents get a report home. We still had things linked to legacy behaviour policy, so we needed to change that. So when we communicate the clarity to everyone else around us, we've decided on certain things which has really helped change management in the trust, and hopefully some of this might be useful to you as you think about implementing something change in your school, whether that's around change on ITE, marking, books, etc. How to go into assembly is actually we provide a briefing document to all staff, which is just one side of A4. Key knowledge, actually, this is some background information, this is the background research. We know where certainty rather than severity of sanctions, children perform better and therefore the behaviour improves. So we talk about things like that. We know that if we're given a research into homework, we'll give a briefing document to our staff on the forgetting curve and why it's important to get things in our long-term and short-term memory, etc. and cognitive science. So we do provide the reason why we're doing something to staff through a briefing document. Always a page, no more than a page, and as short as possible because everyone is really busy. We then narrate kind of what the leader's role is. So actually, if you are implementing a new homework policy, what will the person who's leading that role in schools do on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on an annual basis? What is the leader's role? Because that's so important for implementation to ensure that change is led, not managed. Roles and responsibilities, something we're fairly obsessed about at the 2 Counties. Actually, what is everyone's roles and responsibility in everything that we're doing, and making sure that nothing falls through the gap. So we talk about leaving nothing to chance. So, for example, we've got, might seem very simple, but detentions, which we call corrections because we want purpose, not power. So we refer to the language as corrections rather than detentions. But on that, we've got a real clear kind of roles and responsibility sheet, because if you really want a successful detention or correction in secondary school, it's so much work involved, from the logging to the communication to parents, to the setup of the room, to the work that's been done in the room, to checking the work that's been done in the room, to any restorative conversation you might want to follow up with, to exiting students back out, to make sure if you've got public transport, children get home after stopping late on an evening, etc. So we've got really clear roles on who's responsible for what, so nothing falls through the gap. We've just done a lot of work on appreciations in our Joyful School culture. So we've launched things like golden tickets, attendance raffles, etc. But we've had to be really, really deliberate on who's doing what to make sure that no child is left out, and we are designing our systems around our most vulnerable children. Masterclasses to provide training. So we found this really useful to help us manage change, is that we try and do something at a talking head for 5-10 minutes. Some staff, including me, would prefer to hear something or watch a video than read a briefing document. So we've tried to make sure we are providing professional learnings of masterclasses on key things that are changing or key new initiatives, to make sure staff are up to date, but staff have got it on demand whenever they want to listen or find out about more change in the trust or in schools or in their departments. And that's really helpful, because as a modern flexible workforce, we shouldn't really tie staff down to read a document in a traditional way, but some people prefer that, so the briefing document does that. The masterclasses allows a more modern approach to providing implementation training. We do have professional practice sheets to standardise the format, which is anyone's, I think everyone on this call will be useful kind of action steps, but very much using that approach, which we call professional practice sheets, which is clear action steps for anything that we're implementing. And we know how much the ECF framework, or the Early Careers framework, has helped our new teachers in order to be more precise in their implementation in the classroom. It's something we reflected on as a trust and said, actually, can that model be rolled out for almost anything that we want to change and be really successful through that implementation? So we've done that through professional practice sheets. So we've got those for things like duties, we've got those for things like responding to a parental issue, for parents' evening, so that really our new teachers or inexperienced teachers are as knowledgeable as our most skillful and experienced members of staff, because we've gained that knowledge and passed it on to them. Evaluation tool, this is the bit I said at the beginning we could be even better at, is we have created lots of evaluation tools. So about actually, quality assurance is not a term I particularly like, so that's just one of my things. So we talk about evaluation because I think we should be evaluating things to make things better, not necessarily just quality assuring. So we talk an awful lot about evaluation tools. So just this is what great looks like. Our model of excellence will include X, Y, and Z. And we're really clear that's what we will hunt for, not fish for. Taking a Doug Lemov term from Teach Like a Champion, is we want to hunt for that in our everyday school leadership evaluation, and being really precise with our staff and our students what really great looks like. And that's what we'll focus on in our evaluation. And then really being really clear on communication. I think every school that I've ever worked in, or every organisation that I've been involved in, and we do staff survey, communication always comes up as the next step. And it's so vital, but so easy to get wrong, but so hard, difficult to get right. So I'm sure I'm still on a journey with this, but actually sequencing who's being told what and when is really, really important. And when you get it wrong, you know you've got it wrong, because actually the change falls because the communication around it is not strong enough. So when we think about change, we're thinking about actually that communication of clarity is really important. But if you really want your communication to be clear, you've almost got to do the pre-steps before on the documents, leadership pages, roles and responsibilities, because your best staff will ask you questions about what you're about to roll out. And there's nothing worse than looking silly and not knowing the answers in there, but try and think of as many of FAQs as you possibly can. And then an implementation plan about what will success look like in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, in 5 months, in a year, and what training and practice will be needed for staff to be really successful in the change that's needed. But also I've talked an awful lot particularly when starting new schools up, is actually what does training look like for students and what does training look like for parents. So we often think about training for staff, but actually our children need training for change, particularly in more recent years as that's become more apparent, and our families are increasingly wanting to know what's happening in schools and why it's happening. So that training piece with families is quite key. So if we then look at kind of the implementation stage, so we've done all that communication, we've done the research, we've debated and discussed where we're going, we know exactly what we're doing, and we think this is the vision, we then roll out implementation. And implementation is actually, we now need to walk around and have a look in complete evaluation toolkits. We have various trackers saying, is this the stage we want to be at? So week 1 at the end of, we want all shirts tucked in our schools, have all shirts tucked in or 90% in. We knew that year 11 was going to be more of a challenge perhaps. We wanted homework setting. Do we know that homework's been set in every single subject? We know some of the creative subjects, it's difficult in PE, for example. Are we on track? So have a look at that implementation tracker, which is really important. And from that, it's really about reinforcing clarity. And that's about saying, actually, when we're going to that implementation model, how do we make sure the desired reality is the desired reality and not just an intended reality? And that's where we have to go back for. And I think as leaders, sometimes when we've implemented change, we beat ourselves up. I certainly do, thinking I could have done a better job. But reality is, change is always going to be bumpy. Change is never always going to go to plan, because we've got various human beings who are really, really busy people wanting to do a good job. And sometimes life just gets in the way. And sometimes we've just not communicated the clarity we need to. And that's absolutely fine. For guess what? We're all human and we get it wrong. So about how do you reinforce clarity is really important. So we as a trust and school level and department levels in our trust, we have weekly briefings and reminders for misconceptions. So sometimes I just have to put one out saying 100% sheet is a knowledge organizer. One of the same thing, that's just our terminology, because that has just got lost in translation. We might have to give reminders about what we mean by threshold activity. We might have to give reminders about what we mean by a low level concern in safeguarding. Whatever the area of school life is, we're always mindful that teachers have a lot to think about in a school day. And sometimes we just need really short reminders. That having a mechanism, a vehicle to give people reminders, to reinforce the clarity, to reinforce the language, to reinforce the culture is really, really important. So we do run collegiate deliberate practice sessions, and I've just done a school review today. That's where I've been today. And I think that's really important in terms of our staff here today have said how important that is, and how much they value doing that together as a staff body, because it helps them understand where their kind of consistency needs to be. Some of our schools do weekly lesson visits, and we really clear on our focus for lesson visits. So whereas a trust, we've moved away from lesson observations to lesson visits. So actually we just have an on-tour system. So some people might be aware of on-call in secondary schools. In our secondary schools, we try and run an on-tour. And again, this is something I've done in primary schools historically, where rather than just waiting for a problem to arise, we're proactive and we're going around looking at lessons, helps children understand a leader's going to come into the lesson, and we're looking at kind of focus for lesson visits and being really intentional about that. And actually, we're going to look at this week at X, Y, and Z. It might be students' pride in work. It might be looking at how much reading, affairs reading we're using across the school, what DA time looks like. Line management messages, and being really clear, actually. I suppose in this kind of group we're talking to, this might be during an NQT or an ITT mentor session. It's about actually which message is it best to go to. Is it a line management message? Is it a one-to-one message? Is it a weekly focus for a lesson visit? Is it through deliberate practice, or is it just a message on a sheet? And I try and think really hard about where to land messages. Is it a controversial message which you would never give on an email, or you'd never give on a sheet of paper? Is it low cognitive load, which you can very quickly put on? Or is it high cognitive load, and therefore think about the methodology? So we think really carefully about where messages land and what we do around that. Sometimes there's need for individual coaching or individual practice, because it's just the next step. You won't be surprised here, mine is around speaking too fast, so sometimes I have to practice on speaking a bit slower. We all got our next steps, and it's kind of just looking at that and what that might be. Sometimes we might need an external review, because actually we don't know what we don't know. So I'm always very keen to have other people look at our work as well, to check the change we've done. Is the change was the right change? Ideally, you've done this before the change as well. So actually you've got some expertise or domain specialist knowledge outside your trust or school or your area you're working in, to get some real great advice around change management. And then we run what's called improvement teams, which are network teams, which if you're in a local authority school or you're in a multi-academy trust, where you might also have those running across your kind of organisation, where your English teachers all meet together, or your maths teachers all meet together, or your early years all meet together, or your key stage 1 teachers all meet together. So I think that's really important. Those improvement team meetings sometimes are the place where it's a domain specific thing that needs reinforcing clarity. And then we have study tours. So I've just done one today, being at one of my schools today, doing a study tour, looking around for areas of success, areas for next steps, which allows us to reinforce clarity where something may have not landed correctly, largely probably due to communication. So, and then we do have a trust conference once a year where we kind of reinforce messages as well. So if we look at change management, it's a really big area and it invests lots of time. If you want to manage and lead change effectively, it's about really making time to manage and lead the change. So that initial, is it red or green, is it good or bad? That kind of initial reaction just needs to go into kind of process. And whether I went through Cotter's model and I've just gone through how we do it at the 2 counties, this takes a lot of time. So I will say it's kind of labour intensive. However, I do believe it's really important to have that obsession with the people who's enacting the change in order for it to change land in the way we expect it to land in schools or in our trust. And then we have to update our training materials. So we've got some things which I think are really important for change management. Is our culture here at the 2 counties is that obsession with the front line. So if something is changing with our SENCOs, the people who tell us what the change should be is our SENCOs. If our reception and our signing visitors is changing for safeguarding reasons, we need to talk to our receptionists who are signing visitors in. That real obsession with the front line. Again, another good piece of reading is the Founders Mentality book, which is fantastic about how if you start an organisation off, you become obsessive about the front line and you've got this insurgent mission which guides all change management and what you do within your organisation. We believe in a domain specialist structure. So in my executive head teachers are all domain specialists. So we have someone who's really focused on personal development, someone's really focused on behaviour and attitude, someone really focused on quality of education. We believe that in absolute humility to defer to the brilliance of others. I'm no longer a DSL. I wasn't a particularly successful SENCO the year that I did it. So I will always refer to those teams of people because they're living it day in, day out, and they've got the day-to-day knowledge about those issues. So really about good change management is being led and guided by those people who know the best in those areas. Which means as leaders, whether that's just a classroom teacher leading your classroom or a phase leader in primary schools or a head of department, head of year in a secondary school, having enough ego to make brave decisions about the direction of travel, but also having enough humility to learn from others. The other thing I always talk about when change management, when my heads often ask me, Wes, can we do this? Is this possible? And my answer is, anything is possible because the sky's the limit. It's right to be ambitious for ourselves and right to be ambitious for our families and our students and the community we serve and our staff. But not everything is possible. And sometimes you just have to say during change management, we just can't do that yet because actually we'll end up peanut buttering and not doing a good job of it. But think about what is most important. Always being evidence-led and evidence-informed to make sure we're just not making a snap decision based on our preferences. Believe in a pre-mortem approach about where could this go wrong and trying to second guess and hypothesize rather than post-mortem once it's gone wrong. Communicate and over-communicate clarity and the reasons why. I think it's really important that staff, family and students are really clear on why we're doing something and because with the why it often comes down to being really helpful and invest in effective implementation. If you're about to launch change and you haven't got time to implement properly, and that's after the change has happened, then perhaps I would just stagger when the change happens because you've got to allow some time in your calendars, in your busy lives to make sure the change has landed and has landed in the way that you want it to land. So again, that desired reality becomes the lived reality and lived experience for our staff, students and families. And evaluate precision and rigor, and that's really important because if we want actually to make sure that desired reality is lived reality, is that actually what is it really thing we're hunting for when we're launching it, and make sure we're really precise in what we're looking for and rigorous in how we look for it. And that's really good because that's really supportive of staff. You know, staff generally want to do a great job, and I understand that, and myself included. We all want to do a good job. It's human nature, but we all want honesty about how we can get a little bit better tomorrow than we are today. So it's really important. We have got just back to those where we started, and that's really important as we come bring this bit to a close, is that actually we've got the Empower to Lead model, which results then in a real staggered change management process to make sure change is A, manageable, B, successful, and C, is implemented with absolute rigor. Because actually, if we are instigating change, there must have been a burning platform, there must have been a need to change, there must have been a sense of urgency around it. But secondly, we want to get it right for people. People put a lot of time into change management, so it's important actually we're really codified what that might look like going forward. And the last kind of diagram that I've got here is just to think about is actually when change goes wrong, there's often a gap. Sometimes there's a gap around knowing, so people not being absolutely explicit about what's expected. Sometimes there's a gap around communication. Sometimes there's the knowing doing gap, which we've probably heard of, where someone knows what to do, but actually activating that in a professional capacity and doing the change is more difficult. But I do think increasingly, and particularly for my trust, we've got to look at the reviewing gap. is, do we go back and check and review and amend and be agile enough and be honest enough to say, actually, that's going well, but this bit's not quite as good as we anticipated it to be. And therefore, when we get to that implementation stage, looking, have we cascaded the knowledge, cascaded the communication, cascaded the practice and training, so we've got absolutely fidelity to the doing, and do we make time for the reviewing is really important. So I did kind of steal someone else's term called the knowing doing gap, but kind of make it into a four-way gap: knowing, communicating, doing, and reviewing, which is important. And then two kinds of trust. We have one we all have a legacy sentence which kind of inspires us to any change we're doing. And just to share mine today with you, is he inspired me to inspire others. So if nothing else, hope if it inspires you a little bit to think about change and think about how you can be a leader of change and not just be a manager of change, and see it's something really positive and opportunity. But I do understand sometimes our bandwidth as educationalists sometimes stops us doing that as our natural default. But any questions, queries, concerns? I'm here. I think I might have finished slightly early, Dirk, or you've got other things to do. So let me know either way.
No, thank you, Wes. I'm glad you do talk fast, because you've got through so much there. I'm there scribbling along, like trying to take screenshots of the models and things like that. So no, thank you. That was brilliant. And obviously ending on that inspired me to inspire others. Obviously, that's what we're all about. We are inspiring leaders, but also the fact that we're obviously got 60 odd mentors, ITT mentors here, who will be inspiring the next generation, and teachers to inspire the next generation of children and young people. Lots in there, particularly like what we've been talking about today, that empowered to lead triangle. A lot of things we were saying there today, time savers, professional learning, all the stuff we're talking about for our mentors. And then I started to think about the trainees themselves. Obviously, again, we've got all the mentors here who'll be mentoring these trainees, and the amount of change they go through. We know that half of them will have come straight from university, big change, and then half of them will have come from jobs and other careers, and even bigger change for them. And then they'll change schools during the year. After getting used to one school, they'll go to another school. Then they'll start applying for jobs and get transition to that, and the role the mentor plays in all of that. And you summed up with those leaders' role based on the Kotter. And actually, I was thinking more about the mentor's role of, you said, guiding, building trust, empowering, celebrating, and inspiring persistence, which is massive. We know that, like, resilience and persistence, really massive. And the final thing I'll say, that thing you said quite a few times, because you've reinforced the clarity, is about reinforcing clarity. I thought that was, from everything you've said, you've exemplified that, and really is key for our mentors and our trainees, the idea of those messages, both positive messages when they're doing well, but certainly we've got some modules on that around difficult conversations and when's the time to have them. So much in there. Thank you, Wes. Any immediate questions? They were my first thoughts about linking to what we've been talking about today and beyond. Any immediate questions or thoughts for Wes?
I think, Dirk, if I can just add there, reflecting on how we've been talking this afternoon about how our mentors will guide our trainees through conversations, where some of the words you're using and some of the structures that you've shared, I'm thinking about Kotter, creating the vision, communicating the vision, is very much about how our mentors can give the clarity to trainees in every conversation they have, to guide and give the clarity to know what to move forward to. Isn't that what we've been talking about in our hub sessions around instructional coaching and what that is? That's about creating the clarity to move practice forward, and as a mentor, removing the obstacles in order to then help the trainee to move forward and get those, again, short-term wins. Instructional coaching, moving practice on week by week, is around having those short-term goals and being able to achieve them, and a mentor guides through that. So we can see this with lots of different layers, can't we? As Dirk's just beautifully explained as well, that idea of, we can look at this from a mentor point of view of how to grow as a mentor and as a leader in your own organisation, but then how you can use these processes to support in your day-to-day conversations with trainees too, to support them with the change. Really like the idea of the continuum, the good and the bad message, but actually that we're never one way or the other, really, that actually it's not a continuum, it's more of a process to work around. And all the structures you've shared, Wes, have given us lots of food for thought, I think, here at Inspiring Leaders. Thank you very much.
You know, it's great. I just say it's what's a privilege, isn't it, for all of us on the call who work with the next generation of teachers. So I did used to do a lot of PGC work myself when it was called PGC back in the day, and we did all sorts of traditional things. But it's such great. I get so much pleasure out seeing current RE teachers that you've trained and worked with as much as children. So it is about inspiring the next generation. And you're absolutely right. That vision for excellence learning is what we do day in, day out, and that's what enacts as all our passions. So yeah, it's been lovely being with you this afternoon. So thanks very much for having me, Dirk. I feel really humbled to have this number of people online. So thank you everyone for listening from an hour for me at 3 till 4. So I really appreciate your time and wish you all well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Wes. Thanks for that. Right, thanks everyone. I think that's brought us to a close then. Like, any further thoughts, comments, put in the chat, give us an email. We'll download the attendance register for this. So this will obviously be 3 hours of learning. Thank you for everyone's input. You've got involved in those breakout rooms, which is sometimes difficult if everyone keeps the cameras off. It's a tough sell, isn't it? We've all been there. So thank you. Any final thoughts, Lisa?
No, just thank you very much for your time, and do keep in touch with us. We are here to help and support you as you move into this role, or as you continue in this role. We really encourage the opportunity to keep the conversation going through the year.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great summer when it comes. Thank you.